Welcome to the Reel Rematch, the podcast where we unpack Hollywood's twin films, sometimes cloned on purpose, sometimes by accident, but always in competition. Today's matchup, one-man armies, Rambo, First Blood, Part 2 versus Commando, two muscle-bound rescue missions from the heart of the 1980s action boom, released just months apart. Which one fired up audiences, which one dominated the box office, and which explosive spectacle stands as the ultimate lone soldier showdown.
Hey mate, how you going?
Jeff, I'm well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good, thank you, Justin. All right. Well, as we said last episode, we're going to make a killing of it this week. We're going to talk about Rambo, First Blood Part 2 and Commando, both classic 80s actioners released in 1985.
Man, what a time to be alive. I was too young to see these two films in cinemas and otherwise, but over the years, I've seen these films countless of times, and they are the gift that keeps on giving. Like, they're just, just go to a happy place. It's like a warm, comfy feeling that you have when you're wrapped around a nice soft blanket. Maybe you've got a nice cup of tea, coffee, hot chocolate, whatever. I mean, these films are just like comfort food for me.
I agree. Yeah, they're both just got those classic 80s over-the-top stylistic, crazy action sequences, remembered for going just a bit beyond the normal to a bit ridiculous is not the word, but a little bit over the top is probably what they are. But yeah, they're both absolutely awesome films and have been since they came out in 1985.
And again, like really sort of like popularized sort of like the trope. I mean, I think it'd been in the works probably since there was an element of it kind of like, 70s and kind of dripping the 80s, but like, front and center, that concept of one-man army, right? And, you've got like one guy and his body count's like, triple digits, like just incredible, right? So, as we always like to do, Jeff, like, why did these two films come out, really similar concepts, similar themes and otherwise, the same year? Like, what the actual?
Well, there's no real information as to, they weren't competing with each other in a sense as far as I could see. They're just two films that came about at the same time. Obviously, Rambo was coming off the success of First Blood, which again, dramatically different film in the sense that it was more about as we both know, was just more about a Vietnam vet being pushed well too far. Again, had its own action elements. Not to the extreme that these do, but obviously based off the success of that film, they then went out and started talking sequels and got into that. Whereas Commando was just a action film that came about, went through a few writers, but yeah, it seems to be just a coincidence again that these two films happen to concurrently occur at the same time.
So I want to maybe give some cultural context here because I think that these films are certainly a product of their age, right? So, you've got Ronald Reagan, who's president of the United States at this time. And I guess he had elements of kind of, some of the sloganeering that you hear with, Donald Trump at the moment, where at a high level, who was seeking to make America, a force to be reckoned with, make America great again and otherwise. Reagan had this huge military buildup, right? It was probably the largest peacetime expansion of the United States armed forces in history, right? And as a result, really kind of had this profound impact on, like cultural, the cultural landscape of the decade, also obviously politics, economics and the like. And it clearly kind of like came through and started to influence, Hollywood and action films, right? And, I'll talk about the build-up in a sec, but, effectively, America at the time, we saw a lot of these films, they wanted like a hero who was morally pretty simple, right? But indestructible.
Yes.
Right? You had like canon film versions of this for like Invasion USA with like Chuck Norris, right? Then he also kind of did the same thing in, Missing in Action and Delta Force, right?
But sequels.
But then you had a lot of these Arnie and Sly films that they were kind of like doing, the same thing. I mean, even, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal came out, and that they were kind of, again, one-man armies, right? I mean, Bruce Lee kind of like started this kind of like trend in the 70s. It's obviously, more stylized, more around, sort of kung fu and the variant that Lee used to practice and otherwise. But getting into where we are in the 80s, I think that it'd be amazing to actually, have been in America or been of age and remember some of this stuff. But, just upon reflection, like things were just going nuts, right? Like the defense budget in the United States nearly doubled between 1981 and 1989, right? Spending rose from 134 billion in 1980 to over 290 billion by 1988. It eventually reached about 6% of GDP. Now, to put that into perspective for you at the moment, right, like Trump is encouraging other NATO countries and otherwise to spend 2.5%-3% of GDP on, sort of like defense spending. Australia has to struggle just to get up to kind of like 2% and otherwise. I mean, these are huge, huge, huge numbers vis-a-vis the size of their economy, right?
Yes.
And there was strategic and tactical weapons, modernization. There were new aircraft. We talked about, obviously Iron Eagle and
F-15s and F-16s.
F-15s, F-16s.
Yes.
You had the B-1B Lancer bomber. Then they developed the stealth bomber, which is the B-2 Spirit. There was an expansion of airlift capacity for rapid global deployment. The Navy, Reagan aimed for a 600-ship Navy, right? There was probably the biggest one that came out of that is their higher class submarines with Trident nuclear missiles and the like. The Army and the Marines were equipped with M1 Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, right? The Marine units became better funded, they were larger, they were more mobile. Missile systems were developed, like intercontinental ballistic missile arsenals, like the Minuteman III modernization, the introduction of the MX Peacekeeper, intercontinental ballistic missiles.
It's an ironic name for a nuclear weapon.
100%. So the development and deployment of the Pershing II, the ground-launched cruise missiles in Europe. And then, of course, the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, aka
Star Wars. Yes.
Announced in 1983, proposed space-based missile defense system to intercept Soviet nuclear weapons, right? So research into lasers, particle beams, stuff like that. It was never actually fully implemented, right? But, really signified that America wanted to regain, the not just the economic advantage that they already had on the world, but the technological, the military.
Yeah.
Just they wanted to really dominate that and obviously sort of pressure, what was then the USSR and what have you, and say, look, hey, we're here to play, right? And we're serious as a heart attack. So there were other things that were going on as well in terms of, this army space, there was an increase in global military presence, there was this forward deployment, that they were doing, setting up new bases and facilities in Europe, the Pacific, the Middle East, reinforcement of NATO, and again, rapid deployment forces. There increased training exercises, right? Like NATO's Able Archer drills, which almost, triggered a response by the Soviets in 83. There's intervention in Grenada in 83, involvement in Lebanon and Central America and stuff. There were a whole heap of covert and proxy wars. There was the CIA kind of going to be crazy.
This was peak Civil War, peak Cold War, not Civil War, sorry.
100%, Jeff. So you've got the Mujahideen in Afghanistan against Soviet forces, which was also pretty much the plot line for Rambo 3, right?
Yeah.
Funding Contra rebels in Nicaragua, the Iran-Contra affair, supporting anti-communist forces in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. And then, of course, there was this whole cultural and psychological warfare sort of stuff that was going on, right? And, government-supported media and private enterprise, really aligned around these themes of, American exceptionalism, heroism, good versus evil. So the US versus the USSR, right? Capitalism versus communism. And, Hollywood really mirrored and amplified this. And these two films are great examples of that. We did Top Gun, sort of a couple episodes ago. Red Dawn's another example, right?
But even Rocky IV.
100%. And Rocky solved the Cold War. I mean, The Russian audience at the end of that, crazily, they're going for Rocky. They're not even going for Ivan Drago. I really think that sort of in the water, the zeitgeist, sort of the vibe or otherwise at the time, was really influencing, these cultural artifacts. They really were a product of their time.
Yeah.
And I think these films are amazing time capsules of, the sort of the spirit, the philosophy, and that was really being espoused by the political leadership, and that then went to every sort of facet of, really American society, really, throughout the 80s. So,
yeah,
kind of incredible, looking at it through that lens.
That lens, absolutely. Yeah. No, they're just, as you said, they're of their time. I mean, also for our two main cast members here, we're talking Arnie and Sly here, fully at their peak of their action timelines. You know what I mean? Going through that, well, maybe not their peak, but on their upward trajectory. You know what I mean? And just watching these two guys, let's say, battle it out, is for want of a better word, in these two films is really quite interesting, watching the two parallels that come through, even from their choice of weaponry at certain points.
It's kind of interesting you say that, right? Because this is almost actually kind of towards the end of the peak for Stallone, but the start of the rise of Schwarzenegger. So almost like I wouldn't say kind of like a change in the baton, kind of like a stealing of the baton, right? Because then, like, you think from this film through to Terminator 2, I mean, it's obviously the other films that he did that made, like, like Twins and, Kindergarten Cop and so on. But, like, Total Recall, like, it was huge early 90s for Schwarzenegger, where he was probably the king of the world, right? But, like, this amazing run. And I think this was kind of like this was probably the film, right? Because, like, he came out of Terminator in 84 as the lead bad guy. Stars and anchors, like, this film is like, this new version of what, action hero should look like, and kind of like took the crown from Stallone. Because, like, Stallone after, I mean, 85 was a huge, was 85 the same year that he did Rocky 4G? It was close, right?
It was close. He also did Cobra not long after this as well. So, 3 very interesting films, all with different characters at different points in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, like Tango and Cash in 89, but like, I don't think he hit these heights again, right? Like, I mean, like, from a box office and cultural perspective at the time, like, Rambo was an absolute phenomenon.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And our biggest film in the world. I mean, literally, I think you even had, and you mentioned this to me on sort of like the way up today, like Reagan, I think said it was like his favourite film of that year.
It was. Reagan was a big, even though this film has an anti-government message, because obviously it's not just that Murdoch is the bad guy, it's that the government he represents are the bad guys. But Reagan was a massive fan of this film, right? And we know that Reagan was a fan of Stallone and Schwarzenegger in their personal lives, right? And Schwarzenegger in particular did a lot of stuff with Reagan because of his political leanings. So, they, as you said, they really were just part of the time, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, if you want to just quickly talk about the numbers, now that we've opened that door. So Rambo came first. It opened in May of 1985. Now, and this is where I find this quite interesting, because Rambo did huge numbers, right, for the time, 1985. It opened on May 22nd, took 25.5 in its opening weekend, ended its domestic run with $150 million. Overseas, it took another $150 million for a worldwide haul of $300 million. Right? It was the third highest grossing film of 85, behind obviously the two being Back to the Future and Beverly Hills Cop, which were two other enormous films.
What a year.
Right? It had a budget of $44 million, so it brought home about 6 times budget for the studio. Then Commando opened in October of 1985. It took $7.7 million its opening weekend and went on to finish at $35 million. Took another 22 internationally, so a worldwide total of around $57.4 million. That budget was only $10 million, so it still took in 5.7 times its budget, right? But it's interesting when you go through and look at everything, when you're reviewing these films and researching these films, people talk about Commando being this blockbuster for Arnie, right? Now, it was his first major speaking role, because obviously in Terminator he doesn't say a heck of a lot. And prior to that, we know in Hercules he was actually overdubbed, right? But people talk about this being such a massive box office film. But I think, I mean, don't get me wrong, $57 million in 1985 isn't a small amount of change, right? But I do believe that in terms of, you look at 57 million versus 300, you're not even close.
It's not the same ballpark, right?
It's like you say, it's like Rambo became this huge, huge cultural icon off the back of this film, right? It's like when people go back and talk about it, most people in their minds refer to Rambo for this film. Right. They don't go back as far as First Blood, which was the original Rambo film, and the concept of that being this Vietnam vet who was just victimized and destroyed because he went to Vietnam. And, okay, this is his redemption arc in that sense, but this is the film that people remember as Rambo, as the first one, when it's not. It's the second one.
So, Jeff, can I ask you 2 questions?
Yeah.
Do you prefer Rambo First Blood or Rambo First Blood Part 2?
I haven't seen First Blood in a long time, but I like it's almost like a thriller more than an action film, right? And that's the difference. And this is interesting, and I know I'm jumping the gun here because I know we'll talk about who made these films, and obviously one of the big things is James Cameron wrote this film, or wrote a draft of this film and is credited as a screenwriter on it. You're talking about the same man who took Alien, which was a very tight, taut horror thriller, and created a sequel for that. That is one of the best action films ever made, right? In the top 5, let's be honest, right?
100%.
So it's like he's done that again here, yeah? He's gone, what can I do with this character that expands his story and, obviously, changes it quite a bit, right? And so he becomes this action superstar, mega hero, one-man army. So which do I prefer? If you were looking at the both of them, I like First Blood as a thriller and what it is and the theme it has and the story as a thriller there. But in terms of action, these are two of the greatest action films in terms of their character one-man army profiles that have ever been made.
So for what it's worth, I'm in the Rambo First Blood.
Okay.
Camp, right? I was really late to see that, like late. Like I think it was in my 20s when I first saw First Blood. I couldn't even tell you why. Crazy for me. I know.
Sorry, the original First Blood, it's just called First Blood. It's like the name Rambo isn't even in the title.
Yeah. So I didn't see that until my 20s. For a crazy reason that happened to be. And then I saw it and it was a revelation. And I've watched that film more over the years than I have Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, it's not to say that I don't enjoy Rambo First Blood 2. I love it for all the reasons that you love it, right? But yeah, that one's just, I think probably had more lasting, favourable feelings or otherwise with me. Bit of a mind worm, really, sort of like that first one. So my second question, put you on the spot. Did you prefer Rambo First Blood Part 2 or Commando upon rewatch?
See, I've always had a soft spot for Commando because it is just a tongue-in-cheek, hilarious one-man army revenge story, right? Like they take his daughter, they threaten him to do this. He's like, I've got 12 hours, and in those 12 hours, I'm going to fuck all of you up. Yep. That's literally that's the elevator pitch, right?
100%.
And again, in my research of discovering what went into the writing of Rambo, it kind of changed it a bit for me, right? Because again, going back to Cameron, the story goes that the treatment was written by a guy called Kevin Jarre. He was the original treatment brought in and wrote it. He wrote 50, 70-page treatment, right?
Right.
And again, it's all linked in these films how he did this. He went on to write Tombstone, that guy.
Amazing.
Right? He was supposed to direct Tombstone. He started directing Tombstone. Nobody liked it. Everybody hated it. Kurt Russell was like, what do I do? Sylvester Stallone recommended George P. Cosmatos, who directed Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Oh, interesting.
And that's why he got the gig of directing Tombstone, because Sly recommended him to Kurt.
Oh, and of course, in between the connective tissues that they're in Tango and Cash together.
Correct.
89.
Yeah. So they knew each other. They were buddies.
Halfway between two films, 85, 89, 93. Yeah, right. Fascinating.
Yeah. See, it's all connected.
It's right?
It's one big giant spider web. But Cameron wrote it, and as the story goes, he wrote the action.
Right.
He actually apparently made it more violent than it is on screen.
Right.
Like it's very Cameron ultra-violent back in those 80s days when he was. But then Stallone, because Stallone's credited as the other co-writer, Stallone wrote the political aspect into it, right?
Right.
So the political idea of the government being the enemy of the forgotten men left behind, those kind of ideas that become into it. That was Stallone's input into the script, the script. So I think learning that changed it a bit for me. Right. Not that I don't enjoy it, still love it, but in terms of big, silly, actioner, over the top insanity, it's Commando.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because there's like some set scenes and otherwise in Rambo that are just incredible. Like I love the opening of Rambo, like, the senseless punishment, the futility of all these like incarcerated guys just like, breaking rocks. Like what are they doing? Right. And but at the same time, the stoicism and the sort of like the physicality and the, just the sort of like calm, sort of ascended nature of Rambo amongst all this adversity. And otherwise, like, it's such an amazing setup, right? Troutman coming up to the fans, speaking to him, and he delivers that iconic line that hits me every time, right? He goes, "Sir, do we get to win this time?"
Yeah.
Right? It's like, fuck yeah, I'm in. Like, like, let's go, right?
But that goes back to what you was talking about culturally, is that there was still this element of we lost Vietnam. I mean, there's the whole saying no one wins a war, right? That's what they say. But to bring that in as the whole element of do we get to win this time? And he mentions that again at the end when he talks about winning. Right. So, yeah.
I think there's some amazing set scenes, and then also like some where he goes to rescue the POWs or he does like there's some amazing set scenes in Rambo First Blood Part 2, but like guilty pleasure and just like sheer enjoyment, I actually enjoy Commando more.
Oh yeah, right? Totally.
Because it's like, fuck yeah, like he goes, I want you to break necks, I want you to kind of like, like kill kind of like 1,000 bad guys. Like it's just like, let's go, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I want you to sail off to the sunset with Ray Dawn Chong. Like, I want that for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but like, but it's incredible. Like, and it's funny because maybe when it first came out, or like when I first saw sort of like both films, I probably leaned the other way. But then as I've got older, it's just like, you know what? I think Commando for me is a more fulfilling film.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe it does because it's got that strong revenge aspect or otherwise, but there is a lot going on and that probably means more to maybe ex-military people. I don't know. I'm speculating. I've never served or otherwise, but yeah, just as a guilty pleasure or whatever, like sheer enjoyment, Commando. But like, you know, Jeff, you've talked about the numbers. What about the critical and audience reaction of both films?
Well, it's interesting because it's actually quite a different story here, right? So in terms of Rambo First Blood Part 2, it only sits at a 30% Rotten Tomatoes rating.
Yeah, right.
Which is really interesting considering what it was. Now, again, that's as of now. We're talking here in 2025.
Got it.
You've got to understand, I guess we don't understand the way the system works. Has it gone down over the years as people have changed the way they think about these films, about what they represent to them and those kind of things? We don't know. If this had been taken in 1985 or anywhere between 85 and 89 at the peak of Reaganism and this kind of thing, would this be sitting at 95%?
And you know, to that point as well, I think it'd be great as well to kind of like get, I mean, there's obviously that recency bias or otherwise that you could actually have against, you know, any film. But then also like to separate scores, like, you know, what would, say, Americans think vis-a-vis the rest of the world, right? Like, do they still think more favorably of this film versus rest of the world? I mean, the rest of the world go, hey, you know, it's you know, jingoistic, it's this, it's that, it's the other, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Blah, you know, and maybe see it like, I mean, we don't know because I don't think, you know, Metacritic or Rotten Tomatoes breaks it down in that way, but...
No, that's right. That's right.
It'd be good if they did.
That's true. So Rambo's at 6.5 out of 10 on IMDb, has a 47 number on Metacritic, right? Commando, on the other hand, sits at 68% on Rotten Tomatoes as of now, right, which again, I think actually continues on what we've been saying here, is that guilty pleasure because it doesn't take itself seriously.
Yeah.
Right? If you're looking at this film going, oh, yeah, it's serious. No, right? You're looking at Commando the wrong way, right? 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb and it sits at 51 on Metacritic, right?
Right.
So the IMDb and the Metacritic scores for both films are, let's say, halfway points, yeah? It's just interesting on those Rotten Tomato scores that Rambo sits so low now for what it is. And maybe it is got to do with the sign of the times. On the popcorn meter, Rambo has a 60% rating and Commando has a 68% rating. So they're very, very close.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, like, just as a snapshot point in time, you know, like doing the polls check of the ratings, you know, as we sit here in 2025, that these are the scores. This is what, you know, people are saying and otherwise, right? So, I mean, it is interesting. So look, let's jump into kind of, you know, who made these films or who stewarded these films and otherwise. So let me kick off with Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Yep.
George P. Cosmatos.
Yes.
Hopefully I pronounced that gentleman's name correctly.
I pronounce it the same.
So he did 5 films before this, but nothing of note, right? But then he had, I reckon, a pretty elite run, to be honest. Like, I love all his films.
Yes.
So he did Rambo First Blood Part 2 in 85.
Yes.
Cobra the next year in 86. Leviathan, which I love, in 89. And then Tombstone in 93, which is like, I think, one of the best modern Westerns of all time, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Like, what a run he had from, like, this film through to 93. Like, I mean, you'd be proud to have one of those films sort of in your resume, let alone, you know, the 4 that he has. So, you know, great job by him. Commando. So Mark L. Lester, right? So he did Firestarter in 84.
Yes.
Drew Barrymore. Look, I don't mind that, to be honest. You know, it's not like, oh, hey, you should like wheel out Firestarter again. I don't feel that way, but not bad. This in 85. Armed and Dangerous with John Candy and Meg Ryan in 86.
Yep.
And then he did Showdown in Little Tokyo with Dolph Lundgren and Brandon Lee in 91.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, you know, solid but not spectacular, right? I don't think he had the run that Cosmatos had, but
no.
But pretty good.
It's interesting because his IMDb profile says he has created high-action films throughout his career, including some of the world's biggest box office draws. That's actually on Mark L. Lester's IMDb profile. Now, you can edit your own profiles. That's available on their IMDb, very Wikipedia-like. I'm not saying he did that, but yeah, I agree because, like you said, he apparently directed a film in 1979 called Roller Boogie with Linda Blair, but that's gained cult status.
Right.
Again, like you said, Firestarter in 84. But before that, he directed a film called Class of 1984 and 1982, which is a bit... I remember seeing that as a very interesting, like, sort of anti-authoritarian film.
Right.
And then he did one called Class of 99 in 1990 between Armed and Dangerous and Showdown in Little Tokyo.
Got it.
And I think they're very similar ilk films. But yeah, other than that, he just went up from there. It's more direct-to-video stuff, right?
Got it.
But yeah, he's 79 years old. He still works and he's very active as a producer.
Oh, interesting.
So he's still on the go. So
I mean, like, Cosmatos had passed away, right?
well, he stopped directing in 1997 because his wife died in 97.
Okay, that's
And at that point, he decided that's it.
Yeah.
He stopped directing. He actually became a collector of rare books.
yeah, okay.
But then, died in 2005. He actually had lung cancer. So died of lung cancer, unfortunately. But yeah, that's why, you've got him directing Tombstone in 93 and then a few other bits and pieces and then disappearing into the
I think
wilderness.
one of his last films was like that, like a Charlie Sheen sci-fi film or something.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head.
Look,
but
we'll come to it. So let's jump into the key cast, right? So again, we'll start with Rambo: First Blood Part 2. You've obviously got Sylvester Stallone, right? Shot the lights out with Rocky. You've got Richard Crenna, who, he was in the Sand Pebbles, but I think everyone knows him from Rambo, and he'll always be, Colonel Troutman, I think, for most people. You've got Charles Napier, who's like the real douchebag bad guy, who represents the, the American government or otherwise. He had a decent role in Blues Brothers, but I think everyone will remember him, if they do remember him, from this film.
Yeah.
And you've got Stallone at the peak of his action hero status, right?
Yes.
Stephen Burkhoff, he had a bit part role in Clockwork Orange, a role in Barry Lyndon, and then he goes on this great bad guy run with like Octopussy in 83, Beverly Hills Cop in 84, and then this in 85, where he's obviously the bad Russian guy or otherwise, right? What a fucking run for him. It goes from Kubrick to being like, the go-to bad guy for like action films in like the early to mid 80s. Like, fucking amazing.
Yeah.
I want to career that guy.
Yeah.
And apparently he's a Brit.
He is. Yeah, right? He's a Brit. I think he's a Shakespearean trained, like Royal Shakespeare Company kind of Brit. You know what I mean?
That's amazing.
Like he's full on, very similar in that sense to Hans Gruber, Alan Rickman. Who came out of being a Royal Shakespearean trained actor as well, and then getting cast in this bad guy role in a Hollywood action film that is in my mind, the greatest action film of all time, right? I'm not saying...
No, but, I think that's a conversation for another day, but if not Die Hard, then what, right? It's close. But anyway.
I think Burkhoff's very similar in that he's classically trained, he's got all that, but he's been brought he's picked up this villain role.
Yeah.
And he's run with it.
And it's amazing, isn't it, that you've got these like actors who are so well credentialed, like so well respected in like, in theatre and otherwise, like being like drop shipped into these or, parachuted into these like, action films that they have no right being in, but they lend it, gravitas and a sense of, what they elevate the entire film by their presence.
Yeah.
The fact that they're taking the material seriously, right? And even if they are doing tongue-in-cheek stuff and otherwise, again, it just comes across, just as it makes everything more meaningful. And there's a real, authenticness about their performance. In a way that bit part character actors just could not pull off in the same way, right? So let's talk about, there's also Martin Covey, right?
Yeah.
Who's obviously, our boy from Karate Kid.
Yes.
In 84. He did this in 85. He did a bit role, obviously, at the start of Karate Kid Part 2 in 86. And obviously a much larger role in Karate Kid Part 3, right? So he had a real run through the 80s, mid-80s. And it was great to see him obviously come back, sort of 30 years later in Cobra Kai. So, love that guy. Great bad guy, right? I know he doesn't have much to do here, but it's just great to see him in this role.
I kind of prefer him in the bad guy Karate Kid mode as compared to, because it's like him and the other guy, the blonde guy, whose name I can't remember, but is his only ever film role. I found that out.
Oh, really?
The guy with the sunnies who holds the gun to Troutman's head when they're in the chopper.
Like the reflective aviators.
Yeah. But they're kind of like, Covey's role is very much more like, he's a gun for hire, but he's leaning towards Rambo's side, but he kind of knows he can't get involved. Do you know what I mean? Like he's not a bad guy. He's like a neutral guy. He's not even a good guy. He's a neutral guy.
Yeah.
But I kind of prefer him as in my head, he's still always, the bad guy from Karate Kid.
100%. So let's talk about then the cast for Commando, right? Now, I think what's interesting is that, like, obviously Rambo First Blood Part 2 is pretty much a one-man film. Obviously you've got these great supporting performances, especially by, Charles Napier and Richard Crenna, right? But in Commando, there's a bit more of a round out. So obviously you've got Arnie, right? Now, what a fucking run he goes on, right? Like he does Conan the Barbarian in 82, Conan the Destroyer and the Terminator in 84. He does this and Red Sonja in 85, followed by Raw Deal in 86, Predator and The Running Man in 87, right? Fuck, he's there. He's a right? Like,
yes.
But then he goes on to be the biggest star on the planet.
Yeah.
Now, you've got Rae Chong, right? Who I absolutely loved in this, like, so much. Like, the movie doesn't work without her. Like, she's fantastic in this movie, right? She does this and The Color of Purple in 85. What a year. What a year, right? And, you've also then got Alyssa Milano, right? This is the second feature film, and this is the same year as season 2 of Who's the Boss, right? So she was on a, huge trajectory at this point in time.
Yeah.
And then what I love, again, about Commando, and we do this quite often, there's no Aussie connection in Rambo First Blood Part 2, but Vernon Wells, right? Born and bred in Victoria,
yes,
right? where you and I live right now. He was in The Road Warrior in 81. He was also in Weird Science in 85. I think he's one of the biker guys. And he was also in Fortress in 92, which I love. Again, talking about guilty pleasures. Love Fortress. And obviously he plays, kind of like the key, he plays Bennett or the key heavy or bad guy, probably outside of Sam Hedaya Dan Hedaya, I should say, in this film. Dan Hedaya is obviously in this film. He's a wonderful character actor, 100 plus films. Then the other character who I absolutely love as well, right, is David Patrick Kelly. Now, as you know, The Crow that came out in 1994 is one of my favourite films.
Yes.
Maybe of the 90s, maybe of all time, whatever. And to see him, like, different colour hair and otherwise in this film, like, again, like, it just, like, as you get older and you see more films, whatever, and you go back and you cycle back on these films and you get more enjoyment out of them because you've got more context. So, but he was obviously T-Bird in The Crow. He had roles in 48 Hours in 82, Dreamscape in 84. He had small roles in Wild at Heart in 90, seasons 1 and 2 of Twin Peaks across 90 and 91. He was in Crooklyn in 94, Last Man Standing in 96, and he shows up in John Wick Chapter 2 like 20 years later in 2017, right? But then you've also got Bill Duke, the fucking man, right? He was in American Gigolo in 80. He was in this in 85, Predator in 87, and then Action Jackson in 88. And I fucking love that guy, right?
He's
like,
great.
What a cast.
Yeah.
Like, you look back on it, and it's just like, Commando was kind of stacked.
Yeah.
Right? So, great cast by them, right? So, now, what else have we got, Jeff, in terms of, sort of commonalities or otherwise of these two films?
Well, it's going back to the writers as well, if you want, for at the moment. So we've talked about Rambo, right?
Yep.
Commando has 3 screenwriters noted. Mm-hmm. Okay. So probably the one who's maybe didn't go into a lot of things but did a bunch of other things, Matthew Weissman.
Yeah.
He co-wrote both teen films with Jeff Loeb, who was one of the other co-writers on here, as well as he wrote the new series that was done in the mid-2010s.
Okay.
Jeff Loeb, who wrote both Teen Wolf movies, but he's now a massive, prolific. He works at Marvel. He produces a ton of Marvel stuff. He's been a comic book writer, an acclaimed comic book writer for decades now. But the top guy here is Stephen E. D'Souza, who wrote Die Hard, who wrote 48 Hours, who wrote Die Hard 2, he wrote Hudson Hawk, he wrote Beverly Hills Cop 3, he wrote the 94 Street Fighter film and the 1995 Judge Dredd film. Right? So D'Souza was the action man at the time. So I think that's great. Apparently, from what I read, so Wiseman and Loeb wrote the original script for the film.
Right.
And then, which actually, there's some really interesting stuff around that, which we can go into now or go into later. And Stephen E. D'Souza says he never met those two guys. So he just came in afterwards and turned it into the Arnie vehicle that it was, because it was completely separate, completely different story when he was brought on board. So, yeah, a lot of talent behind these films, definitely.
Just incredible. I mean, production stories and otherwise, like, have you got anything else that you want to sort of like share about either one of these films?
Well, interestingly, so Jeff Loeb wrote the script originally with Matthew Weissman, and he wrote the film for Gene Simmons of Kiss.
What?
To play John Matrix.
That would have sucked. I'm just going to put that out there right now.
And it was actually originally written as he was a Israeli ex-army guy who gets dragged back in to do one last job.
Right.
Right? That's the way it was at the time. From there, when Gene Simmons actually rejected it, he rewrote it for Nick Nolte.
Oh, really?
So Nolte was supposed to play John Matrix, and he was supposed to be an out-of-shape former soldier who is dragged back in. And again, at that point, the kidnap the daughter stuff was brought on board at that point, right? And it was only when Nick Nolte said no, and that's when those guys moved on and Steve D'Souza was brought in and Arnie was brought on board and he rewrote it as the Arnie vehicle that it became that we have said we love so much, right? So, yeah, that's it. But in terms of production stories, so interestingly, for this film, so this was Arnie's first dialogue-heavy film, right? And he was really nervous about it because he knew his English was not very strong or very well. So what happened is Stephen D'Souza would actually go over to his house and work with him on his dialogue line by line for hours at a time,
right,
to break it down for him so he sounded how he sounded, right?
Yeah.
There was an actual love scene written into this film originally between Arnie and Ray Dawn Chong, but they realised if they put a love scene in, a mixed race love scene in between a white man and a black woman in 1985, all the southern states of the USA would refuse to see the film. That was actually their rationale for cutting it out. It was never filmed. It was cut out.
I was about to say, I'd love to see it.
It was never actually filmed. It was cut out of the script prior to production, right?
Well, because you know what's interesting on that as well, like, you know, sort of like you watch Pumping Iron, the Arnie documentary where he's, competing for, Mr. Olympia and so on and so forth, and you read other things of the time, whatever. He had a penchant for women of colour, as sort of like the Americans would call them, and otherwise. So, I think that scene would have been pretty real, pretty feisty.
He might have been well into that one. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just like, no, that's fine. Like, what, you're like pants off and everything? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last big one, which was they actually ran out of money on the film.
Oh, really?
Right? So the actual final battle between Matrix and Bennett was supposed to be this massive, large-scale thing, which was Bennett's riding off on a speedboat, Matrix is chasing him on a speedboat, they crash onto a beach. They start having the knife fight together. They're in the middle of a minefield. There's landmines going off. They're being mortared at the same time and all this stuff.
Oh, wow.
When they got to that, the production said, sorry, Mark, you've run out of money. Work it out.
Yeah, okay.
And so what he did was he actually was walking around the 20th Century lot, and where he was, he heard this noise near his office, walked around, opened the door and walked down into the boiler room and went, this will do. And they shot it on the lot free of charge. And that's why it finishes the way it does when he throws the pipe through him and says one of those all-time Arnie one-liners, hey, Bennett, let off some steam.
And you know what, like, I think it's perfect. Like, in all fairness, like, sort of like the stuff on the boat that kind of feels Patriot Gamesy, but then there's like, them getting mortared and shelled on a beach. It sounds too much. Like, I think the way that it ends is perfect. So happy accident.
Yeah.
Right?
Potentially. But yeah, that's what, there you go. So, but it's still interesting, isn't it? You run into money, you better work out a creative way to fix things. In terms of Rambo, what I found with regards to Rambo was that, okay, so it was originally slated to shoot in Thailand. They were going to do it all in Thailand. And they did do some scenes there, but they moved to Mexico ultimately because they had concerns about budget, but also about insects. So they were worried about the amount of insects they'd run into on production by shooting in Thailand, so they moved it there. Apparently, it actually, even though Stallone had already rewritten it, went through massive, heavy rewrites during production because Stallone was there and on scene doing it at the time to try and create further things. It went smooth. Unfortunately, there was a special effects guy who died on this film. Unfortunately, a death on the film. He was a special effects man, and the film's dedicated to him, called Clifford P. Wegner. He was killed on one of the waterfall explosions, not because of the explosion, but he actually slipped and fell off the waterfall while he was prepping the scene for the massive explosion.
That sucks.
So that's really the only production story I found out of those two.
So coming to Rambo First Blood Part 2, there's actually some real life inspiration that actually kind of like went into this. Like, so in the early 1980s, the US Delta Force Commandos prepared for a possible mission to rescue US prisoners of war held in Southeast Asia, right? So literally like mimicking or mirroring the sort of film art imitating life or otherwise, right? Their efforts were stymied by a Colonel Bo Gritz, right? Again, not dissimilar to...
Sorry, his name was Bo Gritz.
Yeah.
That's an awesome name.
It's a fucking awesome name. Just like John J. Rambo. John J. So just like, again, Rambo's character is, he's a, much decorated former, Green Beret, Vietnam war vet. And, again, like he's kind of like left hung out to dry, right? But they sort of like cut him loose and don't want to send the choppers back to get him, or they're just about to get him and they fly off again. They sort of get the orders. And, what was interesting, there was a US government inquiry headed by senators and Vietnam vets, Bob Smith, John Kerry, and John McCain. And obviously McCain famously was a former prisoner of war himself, who was held and tortured for like 5 years.
Yeah.
So they concluded there were no prisoners that were left behind. And, again, sort of like, they vilified, any individuals perpetuating the idea really as an attempt to defraud desperate families. So it was interesting. There was an element of there. But I also read that apparently at the time of filming in 1985, there were close to 2,500 Vietnam veterans still missing in action. So, I think there's maybe, again, an element of truth, an element of obfuscation by the US government.
Yeah.
And different people weren't really wanting to muddy the waters to kind of shape the narrative to kind of like suit, what it is that they're trying to do at the time. But there's certainly something there, right? And it really was picking up on something. And what I love about Rambo First Blood Part 2, again, that whole concept of, hey, do we get to win this time? And the fact that they go in and they're trying to, salvage something out of what was an A-grade clusterfuck.
Yes.
And like you see that the desperation, the futility, right? And, this guy who has gone off to serve his country, and then he's vilified when he comes back for looking like a bum, right? Because he's got long hair and he's a wanderer and he's no fixed address and so on and so forth by, this sort of a redneck, sort of highly judgmental and otherwise kind of like sheriff. This guy suffering from PTSD should probably, have been having,
which was barely a thing in 1985.
Treatment, yeah, but like again, like they didn't have the tools or equipment. They didn't probably have the diagnoses to be able to assess that appropriately and give him the appropriate care. So there is that nice redemption feel in Rambo Blood Part 2, and obviously I think there's a little bit of fact and a little bit of fiction, but it is still like pretty satisfying, right? And talking on the PTSD stuff, so you mentioned James Cameron obviously a fair bit, and obviously like A-grade supernova talent who was making his mark in a hurry from the mid-80s and beyond. So one piece that I read about sort of the script is that Cameron's sort of script, he did a whole heap of work and research on Vietnam veterans and post-traumatic stress disorders, right? And he was also writing the script, obviously, for Aliens in 1986 at the same time. Famously, they said he had 2 deaths going on. Aliens was one and Rambo First Blood Part 2 was the other, right? And he also used his research to write the PTSD element into Ellen Ripley's story arc, right? After the trauma, obviously, she went through in the original Alien. So apparently in one version of his script, Rambo was a mental patient, right? And he'd been in the mental hospital following the events of the first movie. He's visited by Colonel Troutman, right? And then apparently Stallone was the one who rewrote it. So he's at a labor, like this menial labor work, sort of like, prison in the middle of nowhere. And, Cameron obviously still loved the concept of this mental patient, and apparently, allegedly, I don't know, no way for us to fact check this, used that concept in Terminator 2 with Sarah Connor.
Putting her into the mental hospital.
Yeah, Linda Hamilton's character, and put her in a mental hospital, right? Where she's like, she transformed from this, like, this waitress to a mad criminal suffering from acute schizoaffective disorder following the events of like the first movie, right? So yeah, it was interesting that was all sort of like happening at the same time. Yeah. So that's some of the sort of like stuff that I had on Rambo. When it comes to Commando, like probably more fun facts than actual sort of like production sort of like stuff. But one production thing is that they actually shut down an entire terminal at Los Angeles International Airport for filming, which would be unheard of today. That just would
never be allowed to do that,
right?
Or it would cost an absolute far too much money to do that.
Exactly. So the other kind of like, fun facts around production that I had is that
an iconic filming location for Commando was the Sherman Oaks Galleria, and a common misconception is that T2 was filmed there as well.
The house at the end where they have the big final shootout where he kills X number of people is the same house for Beverly Hills Cop where they did sorry, did I kill your point there?
No, not at all. Yeah, and like, I mean, amazing, right? And I love the fact that you find this great location, you can shoot another way. Why wouldn't you go back there, right? Yeah. There's no point like reinventing the wheel. Location scouting, otherwise there's an art form unto itself. But if you find a great location, like why not, shoot it?
Yeah, exactly.
Shoot it again. Like, let's do that, right?
Yeah.
So some other interesting things that I did find about Commando and the casting is that apparently Winona Ryder, Shannon Doherty, Elizabeth Shue, Drew Barrymore, Jennifer Connelly, and Patricia Arquette all auditioned for the role of Jenny.
Any one of those would have been awesome in that role.
100%. Look, I've got to be honest. Like, I loved Alyssa Milano in that. I think she did a great job. But if you had to substitute out any one of those other ones, the only one I probably wouldn't have believed would have been maybe Drew Barrymore. maybe. But in all fairness, I think they would have been great.
But don't forget, she would have only been the same age as Alyssa Milano back in those days.
No,
she was, what was she, 8 when she did E.T. in 81?
Yeah, but it's hard to put her past Gertie, right? In kind of like such a close sort of like tight time zone. But I think you're right. Any one of those would have been great, right? So the other things that I got aren't 100% production related, but apparently, and you hear a lot about this in terms of Arnie Productions, that while filming, he'd run like 3 to 5 miles a day, and of course he'd pump iron for at least an hour. The other fun fact that I found was the director Mark L. Lester said in a 2011 interview that producer Joel Silver, right, asked him to direct the movie while they're at a party at the Playboy Mansion.
Oh, really?
Now, does it get any more 80s than that, Jeff?
No, it doesn't.
That is super, super cool.
Sorry, there is another story that, you know, the scene with Sully where he holds him over the thing and says, I'm going to kill you last. You know, I'm going to kill you. Yeah, that's right. Matrix, he said, I lied. What happened to Sully? I let him go. Right? Mark Lester actually believed, because Arnie was so fit and so buff and he was pumping, in excess of 350 to 500 pounds. That was his pumping iron, right? That he believed he could stand there for hours and hours like this.
Just holding
him by the foot over this giant fucking drop.
Yep.
Right? Until Arnie pointed out, that's not what I do, right? I could probably stand there for a bit, but I can't hold this man up like this. So they had to rig him, right? But yeah, Mark Lester believed that Arnie could just do that physically himself.
That is hilarious. Actually, I do have something else for you from a production perspective. Apparently, and again, no way for us to, verify this or otherwise, but apparently Commando was inspired by the DC Comics character Sergeant Rock.
Oh, right.
Which, again, allegedly, Arnie and producer Joel Silver had actually tried to make into a movie for a very, very long time, right? And the screenwriter, your mate, Lower, he had written comics as well, apparently, and he gave Sergeant Rock's first name, Franklin, to General Kirby in the film, right? And his middle name, John, to Matrix.
There you go.
So there's a little bit of...
See, it all ties in. We've talked about this before.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of that. But, there's also some other, like, really interesting things as well, Jeff. And, there's a couple of things that show up in, especially, kind of like Commando, that ended up showing up in a whole heap of other films, throughout the 80s and otherwise. So you've got something pretty fun.
Well, yeah. I mean, this started... It seemed to be that during the 80s into the 90s, the dog of favour for any kind of villain was your Doberman, right?
Yes.
So you had Dobermans in this film, but then you also go into films that had Dobermans going on from here. Was The Running Man in 87, They Live in 88, Canine, where the Doberman was the bad guy in that film, in 89. Raw Deal had guard dogs as Dobermans. Beastmaster in 82 had guard dogs as Dobermans. A View to a Kill, Zoran, the main Bond villain, he had his guard dogs with Dobermans. And then DC Cab in 83 had that. All the way, keep going to Dead Tango and Cash in 89, where Dobermans have been. So it doesn't matter where you went in the 80s, your bad dog of the decade was your Doberman.
And I also remember even in video games, do you remember Wolfenstein 3D? I'm pretty sure the attack dogs they were Dobermans as well. Right?
That's
they were
probably because of that, for that reason.
Just to go to hey, I need a menacing dog and I'm a bad guy, get me a Doberman.
Yeah.
You know what, get me two.
That's right.
Also, I remember that they even got parodied, became a trope within a trope. In Last Action Hero, right, where there's that crazy scene that someone claps and the dogs form this dog pyramid, right?
Yes, yes. That's right.
It's fascinating. So also, I mean, I think there's a small scene as well in Last Boy Scout, right, where two Dobermans kind of appear as well, right, and. Again, I just Dobermans, 80s, bad guys. It was just...
Well, even think of True Lies in 94 when the two Dobermans run at him and the way he conquers them is to smack their heads together.
Smack their heads. So... it's Dobermans action film bad guys. It's like ham and cheese. It's fantastic combo that never ceases to please, right?
That's right.
So there's also something else in Commando that I think had kind of a lasting impact, right? It's where, Arnie's character prepares for his one-man war, right? Where... he's putting on his military gear, he's strapping on weapons and explosive, camouflaging his face, loading up his ammo, packing the gear into the bag before he starts, rowing to the island. It's shot as this wordless, tightly edited montage, accompanied by James Horner's pulsating score, transforming Matrix into this human, tank or whatever, right? And it's not just this functional kind of aspect. It's like this ritualistic aspect of doing what he's doing. Like he's gearing up, he's ready, he's going. Now this became, I think this hyper stylized way that they did it in Commando, they kind of like set the scene as one of the most influential things that, was like well copied before. It wasn't the first one to do it. Like there was elements of this in like First Blood, funnily enough.
Yeah.
In 82.
There's also chalk and cheese there too, Richard. They're two suiting up scenes, you know what I mean?
It's not as like stylized and ritualistic as Commando. Like Commando really essayed it, right? But funnily enough, there's also another Arnie film, like in Conan the Barbarian 82, where it gears up with war paint and weapons before the climatic battle. It's more kind of like mythic, but not quite the full sort of like modern gear up, transformation from kind of like a person into a menacing thing or weapon or whatever.
Yeah.
But, then, you've then go on this run where, you see it again in, funnily enough, like Arnie loved to come back to this, right? He does it again in Predator, right, in 87, where he's like putting on the mud and so on and so forth. Funnily enough, you see it in Rambo 3, right? So you actually get Sylvester Stallone doing it, and he's literally, it's almost an identical kind of like, gear up montage with knife, ammo, grenades, and so on and so forth, right? There's the famous, or I reckon one of the best superhero versions of it in Batman in 1989. Batsuit montage, gloves, belt, boots, chest plate, and then you see, variations on theme in, Universal Soldier, G.I. Joe, Punisher, The Matrix, even Iron Man. It has this suit up sequence is pretty much, Commando reimagined with tech. And, there's other kind of like callbacks to it, things like, RoboCop, but there's like, it became a massive thing. And I've got to admit, Jeff, I love seeing that, because when you see that, it's just like people are about to die, buildings are about to explode, shit's about to get real.
Yeah. Well, this is how long it's continued. Think about the suit up scene in Deadpool vs. Wolverine when he's back to the TSA, time with whatever. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yep.
In the lift, which is obviously a humorous version because he takes the piss out of it at the end, but that's how long that trope has been running for. We're going from 1985 to 2024. It's continual. It works. It's always as you said, it brings something on afterwards. You know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. But I mean, like, what's not to love, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's been so enduring.
Yeah.
Look, I don't have any sort of like more production stuff. I've got more sort of like fun things or things that I enjoy. Did you have anything before we move on?
Well, okay. So this is also around the time that 80s characters started getting their daughters threatened. So you've got Jenny as Matrix's daughter. She didn't just get threatened, she was actually taken.
Right.
But obviously in 87, they took Murtaugh, they threatened Murtaugh's daughter in Lethal Weapon. Punisher in 89, same thing. They took his daughter, they threatened his daughter as well. So this is when that sort of trope of threatening the family became a bit more prevalent. It also involved them being taken, etc. So that was a big thing. I guess if you wanted to go into some fun facts, so let's start with some formal stuff, if you'd like.
Okay.
In the US Army, a major general, who is Major General Kirby, is 2 ranks above a colonel, and Matrix was a colonel, right? Troutman is a colonel because he's Colonel Troutman. So he's 2 ranks above that. So the Major General outranks the colonel by 2 levels. And then, so therefore, if you want to look at it technically, because Rambo only finishes a captain, Matrix outranks Rambo.
So it's kind of like a dig measuring contest.
Potentially,
or contest or whatever it is.
Yes.
Between these 2 films.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's such a great kind of like, subtle middle finger, or maybe not.
It's a little bit of a fuck you. Whether it was intentional or not, it's 100%. A little bit of a fuck you.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So other than that, I've just got some interesting, I've got some fun facts. Did you want to run through your fun facts first?
So, well, look, I mean, there's a couple of fun facts that I have, right? So Sylvester Stallone apparently ranked his preference of Rambo films on the Graham Norton show, right? Now, he ranked this one 4th, his least favourite. He actually said it was just like a cartoon. So, as history, sort of unfolded and otherwise, not a cherished film in sort of the canon as far as Sly is concerned. This was the 4th sequel in history to gross over 300 million worldwide after Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars Episode 4, Return of the Jedi in 83, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 84, right? The other, I guess, sort of a fun fact leading into this film is if you go back to First Blood, so apparently, according to the interweb, Rambo was sentenced to 8 years in prison for assaulting police officers, grievous bodily harm, murder of a deputy, attempted murder of a sheriff, and destruction of public property, right?
Right.
So I thought it was interesting. Maybe I should have put this in the production element as well, is that apparently the crew had a hard time finding Asian extras in Mexico, so they eventually recruited enough by visiting local Chinese restaurants. So you can't make that sort of stuff up.
You can't make that stuff up.
And, first of all, I think some of the stats and the way that they, mythologize, Rambo, I think it's some of the best we've heard, right? And again, this trope rolls out over the next 30 years and counting.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. But, his stats is given the film like Rambo, Judge, born, 7'6", 47, obviously, month, day, year in American format. Bowie, Arizona, of Indian German descent, joined Army, 8/6/64. Accepted Special Forces Specialization, Light Weapons, Cross Trainers and Medic, Helicopter and Language Qualified, 59 confirmed kills, 2 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze, 4 Purple Hearts, Distinguished Service Cross, Medal of Honor, right? But what's interesting, 59 confirmed kills as a soldier, Rambo kills 74 people during the course of this film, right? Which only spans 2 days. So in 2 days, Rambo kills more people than his whole time in the war.
Yes. And you know what? In terms of this is an action film, I found no one dies in this film until the 34th minute.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Didn't realise
And
that.
the film's only 90 minutes long. So it takes a third of the film before people start dying. So 74 people die. Even more, probably, because of who kills who, between the 34th minute and the end. So, yeah. Now, interestingly, you said Rambo has 74 confirmed kills in the film.
Yes.
Matrix has 81 in Commando.
Bang.
So it's
Beat by 10%.
Exactly right. Rambo only speaks 134 words across the entire film.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Less is more, Jeff.
That's right. That's right. So Stallone did 8 months of training, 4 hours a day. He also took SWAT, combat, archery, and survival courses to get into the shape and mental awareness for being that.
Okay.
Charles Napier, who plays Murdoch, was originally offered to leave Marvin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, who turned it down.
I've got to admit, Napier's awesome in this film.
Yeah. Yeah, but Charles Napier recalls that for a long time after the movie, people would walk up to him and go, I really hated you in Rambo. Apparently they got told that all the time because he was the bad guy of what he did. The producers originally, in one of the early iterations, wanted Rambo to have a sidekick and they wanted Travolta for the sidekick.
That would have sucked.
Stallone actually vetoed it and said, there's no fucking way in hell.
Yeah,
right?
Good call.
Now, Dolph Lundgren was initially cast as Podolsky, the role that Burkhoff took.
Right.
When Stallone realised this, and also he was going to be Drago in Rocky IV,
Same year, 85.
Sorry, yes, 85.
Yeah.
They paid out his contract and said, no. And then they cast Burkhoff off the back of that. So they paid out.
Really?
Lundgren got paid out to not be in this film, to be Drago instead in Rocky IV.
He would have loved that.
Yeah.
And in all fairness, full respect to Lundgren, but Burkhoff kills it in this role, man. He's so good.
Yeah.
And also, the fact that he's just a little guy like every man and otherwise, I think it just suits the character so much.
Yes, I think I agree. Because obviously Lundgren was built, right?
Well, he was 6'5" or something crazy like that, right? He just is the menacing, physical, imposing presence. So
it would have made no sense that the dude who tortures Rambo would be there. Why would he even need to be?
Yeah, he wouldn't either. Logan's you know what, I've got this. Send this one out.
Yeah,
right?
you go wait in the car.
Yeah, right. Go cook me up some, cook me up some dinner. Make yourself
exactly right. So this is the only Rambo film nominated for an Oscar.
Oh, for what?
For best effects and best sound effects editing.
Right.
And so also during production, all the arrows, when they were being shot, they were all hung on wires. So they knew where they would land when they were supposed to land. So there was no chance of anyone getting hit. All the arrows were all on wire to make sure they hit places. Now, one element, I probably should have said this in production as well. In the scene where Ko dies, the Vietnamese, there was a triple zoom shot and Rambo screamed, "No!" apparently when they originally cut it. But during test screenings, people laughed so much at it that they took it out and recut it down to what it is now.
Oh.
Because they thought it would just affect the tone of the film.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what I have on Rambo. So a couple of things about Commando. The knives that Bennett and Matrix use at the end, they're all custom made for those two guys to be bigger and shinier and everything else by a Southern gentleman who apparently specialises in knives.
Okay.
Arnie did most of his own stunts.
Right.
Purely because production couldn't find a body double to match his size at the time, and they didn't have the money to do it. So because of that, he ended up with a dislocated shoulder and stitches from various injuries. So Arnie and Vernon Wells apparently became very good mates on this film, and he still speaks to him. Vernon and Arnie are still in contact and still talk to this day.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And the last thing I have Oh, two other things. There was a Commando 2 written, right? Now, the long-standing myth is that because Stephen D'Souza wrote Commando 2,
Right.
is that it was turned into Die Hard.
Oh, really?
That the script for Commando 2 was turned into Die Hard.
Interesting. Okay.
And it was going around saying that. But Stephen D'Souza, who wrote the original scripts, eventually actually had to come out and say, no, it's not. He'd written the script for Commando 2. Obviously, Die Hard is based off the book that it became. He didn't use anything from the Commando 2 script in Die Hard. But apparently because of the similarity and the fact that he wrote them both, it became a myth in Hollywood until he actually came out and said, calm down, people.
No, yeah.
My last little fun fact, which I can leave you with this, Dan Hedaya's country comes from the fictional country of Valverde, which is also referenced in Predator.
Yeah.
And Die Hard too, because that's where the bad guy comes from, the country of Valverde.
That's incredible.
So it was a country name that was used in productions for many years.
And they never upset anyone, right?
No.
Because country doesn't exist. Smart.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So I'll talk about some of the things sort of like that I love and otherwise, like Colonel Troutman with the aphorisms. Like he crushes it in the first one so hard. He goes, he needs stuff to make a billy goat puke, right?
Yeah.
But like one of my favourite lines of this one, he goes, what you call hell, he calls home.
Yeah. Which is actually one of the taglines they used in the film as well.
Is it?
Yes.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Obviously, we talked about the ritualistic stuff in Commando and otherwise. There is an element of that in this one as well, where Rambo is sharpening the knife, he's putting the small blades in his belt, putting the bullets in, doing up his shoelaces, putting the film in the camera. But again, it's just not done in that sort of a highly stylized kind of, rapid cut version that Commando is.
Yeah.
So the other question, this is probably one that we can't answer, right? But like, remember the scene where Rambo's tied to the yoke? He's up to his armpits in muck. He's got leeches on him. What is that muck? I mean, seriously, like, is it effluent? Is it cooking oil? Is it both? How come there's so much of it? And how did it get there? Like,
Very good question. I don't know.
What the fuck?
I just thought it was a putrid water mud pit.
Because, dude, you look at that, because I actually, obviously got it on, HD and so on and so forth in a way that we didn't have it way back when it was first coming out in VHS.
Yes.
And it's like legitimately disgusting, right? And it's like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Anyway, also, I picked up on it. Maybe I'm wrong. Happy to be corrected. And I've got no way to verify this or otherwise. But where Sly pushes the helicopter pilot out and takes control, right? There's this small bit of music that feels like it's lifted from Back to the Future.
Really?
Yeah.
You know I'm going to have to go back and watch that, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, come back to me next episode or a couple of episodes' time.
No worries, I will.
Now, again, I'll jump into some of the stuff that I like and some of the stuff that's a bit rando in Commando. And I think that the one-liners in Commando are some of the best I've ever heard, right? And I mean, it's really kind of sets the scene early with Bill Duke, where the guy races out with his garbage, right? Bill Duke and the other guy on the garbage truck goes, I was afraid you guys would miss me. Right, and Bill Duke goes, don't worry, we won't. Then pulls the Uzi out, just mows him down mercilessly.
The Uzi in the middle of some sort of random American street.
It's awesome,
and
right?
No one, there's nothing, that's it. Just puts it back in the garbage truck and drives off.
Drives off. And and let me talk about that scene as well, the kind of just under the surface threat lurking in suburbia and the paranoia, with the garbage truck down the streets in Commando. I think it was a real common theme in the 80s. Mm. They're just I mean, in a very different film, in a very different way. David Lynch does the same thing in Blue Velvet, which came out, a year after, in 86, where, you've got this beautiful suburban setting, and then he goes underneath the grass, you see all the insects and bugs and ants and so on and so forth, kind of going crazy. There was that theme, I think, comes across quite strongly.
It almost goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, in the sense of Cold War paranoia and the fact that we're not safe in our homes. And that's why we need this military and these men and these armies and these heroes to protect you.
And, and the fact that the artifice and not everything is as it seems.
Yes.
So there is stuff potentially underneath the surface that the general population otherwise either aren't paying enough attention to, don't know about, or, pick something. Anyway, coming back to classic one-liners as well. And again, I'm just going to stick with my boy, Bill Duke. The very next scene after that garbage scene, or the garbage collection scene or otherwise, he's in the car dealership. Right? He goes, you know what I like most about this car? And the salesman's like, what? And he goes, the price. And then he drives through the window, runs over the salesman, doesn't look back and just keeps driving. It's so brutal, right? And the brutality in this film as well, is so fucking amazing. Or as well, where the death of the large guy on the plane, where Arnie just snaps his neck and puts a pillow behind him. It just sets the tone for the sheer, like, you know, brutality sort of.
Well, even those, because not only that, like, you go back to your scene you're talking about there, it's, he hits the guy, he hits the salesman to do it and drives off, and that's in its own right. But then they cut back to the salesman lying on the ground in the middle of the street, blood pissing out of his thing, lying there dead on the road. Right? That's how brutal this film is.
I know.
Yes.
It's great. So now let me jump into some like rando awkward stuff. Like the father-daughter scenes at the start of Commando are so awkward. Like, especially the ice cream scene, like, it's like, you know, no one really behaves that way. Like, no, I don't think anyone's ever done that ever, right? You can tell that Arnie had no idea as to how to interact with, you know, a kid or whatever. Clearly pre-kids for him. The karate scene, like, you know, he's teaching her karate, that kind of feels... or kind of makes a bit of sense, like, you know, hey, you need to defend yourself, and otherwise, you know, the fishing scene, hey, you're a survivalist, you're out here in nature, you need to be able to fend for yourself, that kind of makes a sense. But then seeing the deer and then patting it and feeding it like it's a domestic pet makes no fucking sense. Like, it's like, what the hell? Right? But then I actually thought about it. It's just like, hey, where's the mum?
Yeah.
Where's the mum? And it's never explained.
That's true.
It's never addressed.
No.
Right? And that's why, again, it kind of breaks my heart. And you've already picked up on this and you've sort of like covered the topic. And otherwise, like, you could have thrown something in there for us and Ray Dawn Chong at the end. Like, it looks like they're going to go off and be about a happy family. Like, throw us a bone. They,
they kind of, there's a slight because she gives her a little, I think, don't they hug when he brings her to the beach? Doesn't Ray Dawn Chong hug Alyssa Milano?
I think so, yes.
And then puts her on the plane and then Arnie gets in last and kind of gives some sort of wry smile and shuts the door on the plane.
Takes
That's
off.
it.
Yeah, that's it. So, again, hinted at, nothing ever happens. Where a father kisses a daughter or any other family member on the lips, that never really sits well with me.
I agree. That was awkward as well.
Look, I know some families do it, and that's fine. And, you know, I'm just judging things obviously based on, you know, what makes me feel comfortable and others. But, I just don't like that. I don't think it sat well in 85. Certainly doesn't sit well in 2025, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's also then that scene at the start of the film where Alyssa Milano's character, or Jenny, makes sandwiches for Arnie, right? And he asks her, goes, what's in it? And she goes, you don't want to know. And then they just happily eat them and like munch away. It makes no fucking sense.
Yeah.
Like obviously, like, you're saying, what's it? Is it because it's a bit funky or it's a bit weird or whatever? And then you're happy as a clam. Just do these sandwiches. And
My daughter made me cat food with lettuce.
Exactly. I mean, like, everyone's going to eat, right? But I mean, I also find it funny in Matrix where his first name is John, which is just a shameless rip-off of Rambo. They're not trying to hide it, right?
Yeah.
So I've only got a few more things. I don't even remember the scene in the Galleria where both Sully, he's in is Sully in the yellow car or the red car?
He's in the yellow car. He's in the yellow Porsche.
So Sully's in the yellow car, you know, Arnie and Ray Dawn Chong, they're in the red car, right? Yeah. As they both drive and pull up to the Galleria, you kind of like slow motion that, whatever. It's clear that it's not David Patrick Kelly driving that car, and it's not Arnie driving that car. So, I mean, is this like just a second unit thing where they thought the key guys don't need to be here for that? Was it an insurance thing? Like, it's too dangerous to drive and pull into this suburban and go, what the fuck? It doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you have a double for that?
Yeah, that sounds weird.
Anyway, something I picked up on. And then, I don't know if you remember this, but roughly 1 hour and 2 minutes, Bill Paxton makes a small cameo.
Yes.
It just brought joy to my heart.
Oh, no, I totally were like, when Bill Paxton shows up, I'm like, yep, this is fantastic. This is fantastic.
I mean, that's everything. And it's kind of funny as we've kind of like gone through these films and otherwise, like, you know, as much as, you know, both, you know, sort of like both films, you know, have a lot of similarities and otherwise, I think, you know, with the joy and otherwise that we're talking about Commando, it's both clear that we have this sort of like strong vibes, but I've got to be honest, I love rewatching both of these films. These films will both always be kind of like in my rewatchables file and otherwise. And what a pleasure it was to, you know, spend a bit of time revisiting and analysing these films.
It was great because, I mean, I've only ever seen these films as just things to watch and enjoy and fun, and deep diving them into them gave a bit of joy. As I said, yes, okay, twisted a bit of Rambo for me, but finding out all the stuff that happened and whatever, and look, you're right, rewatching these films is always a pleasure and always a joy. Absolutely.
As it is doing this pod with you, Jeff. And hey, so tee us up, my friend. What do we have to look forward to next episode?
Well, okay, we're going to go into the jungles of various places. I think let's go back to let's go back to Ray Harrison Ford. We're going to do Temple of Doom, but we're also going to look at the absolute legendary film Alan Quatermain and King Solomon's Mines. Well, we'll get into that next time we catch up. Okay?
Mate, looking forward to it.
All right, buddy. Talk to you soon.
See you, Jeff.
Cheers.